Hey guys, tonight we drift into a story so placid, so undisturbed by drama or disaster, that it might actually cause your pillow to fall asleep before you do. You find yourself in the heart of Persia, under the reign of Shah Safi II, a man whose rule is so legendarily uneventful. It makes beige paint seem emotionally volatile. You're not watching battles unfold, or uprisings crackle through the provinces. Nope, you're standing beside a throne that hasn't needed polishing in weeks because, well, no one's really sitting on it. The Shah is technically there. Yes, but emotionally, strategically, spiritually, not so much. His most aggressive act today might be choosing whether to sip rosewater tea or melon juice first. You probably won't survive this epic wave of tranquility. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where we're all nodding off from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the ornate corridors of the Isfahan Palace. The tiles gleam softly underfoot. There's no rush, no one to impress. The guards don't even straighten up as you pass. It's not laziness, it's just consistent chill. You hear a lute playing faintly somewhere, accompanied by a yawn that's definitely louder than the melody. This is the world of Shah Safi II, ruler of the Safavid Empire from 1666 to 1694. Though technically born as Sultan Hossein, he takes the throne not with a roar but a sigh. The previous Shah, Abbas II, his father, was a more competent if not overly charismatic figure. But Safi II? Oh, he's redefining passive leadership. Like, if leadership were a blanket, he'd be the weighted kind. His coronation ceremony has all the pomp you'd expect, with drummers, dancers, and peacocks dyed in colors nature never intended. But the man himself? Quiet, pale, slightly cross-eyed. According to one possibly salty diplomat, he doesn't wave, he doesn't smile, he mostly just blinks, occasionally nods, and then disappears back into the marble halls. It's giving, forced to attend your own birthday party, energy. And yet, here's the twist, you don't hate it. There's something comforting about this sleepy stewardship. He's not executing relatives, not launching conquests, not imposing cruel reforms. He just exists. And for a 17th century monarch, that's practically revolutionary. Historians still argue whether Shah Safi II was unusually pious, quietly depressed, or simply disinterested in ruling. Some say his religious advisors had too much sway, nudging him into long, silent fasts and longer, quieter sermons. Others claim he was content to be a figurehead in a well-oiled bureaucratic machine. One fringe theory even suggests he may have had a neurodivergent disposition that made public life exhausting. Though we'll never know, what we do know is that by the time he ascends the throne, the Safavid Empire is already a mature beast. Its borders are mostly stable. Its enemies are either exhausted or busy elsewhere. And the capital of Isfahan is thriving. Artisans are weaving rugs with such intricate patterns you could get lost in them like a medieval IKEA. Poets gather in tea houses to argue over metaphors no one really understands. Life moves slowly, deliberately. You wander into the Shah's private quarters, not that it's a dramatic reveal. The room smells faintly of jasmine and ink. A Quran rests on a cedar stand. There's a painting of a lion fighting a dragon. But you suspect that's the most aggressive thing in the room. The Shah sits cross-legged, reading, or meditating, or possibly napping with his eyes open. It's hard to tell. He raises a single hand when a servant enters with sherbet. That's his boldest move today. But don't be fooled. Beneath this hush-hush atmosphere, there's an entire empire being quietly managed. Roads are maintained. Grain is distributed. Taxes are collected with surprising efficiency. It's just that none of it requires the Shah's direct attention. You get the sense he's okay with that, maybe even relieved. One mainstream historical record describes Safi II's reign as a period of relative peace. Relative, because sure, there are occasional skirmishes, some tribal unrest on the fringes, a tax protest here or there, but nothing erupts into full-blown crisis. It's like the empire has slipped into cruise control, and the Shah is just adjusting the seat warmer. And then there's the weird bit. Apparently, Safi II briefly changes his royal name to Shah Suleiman I, because why not spice things up with a rebranding halfway through? It's not entirely clear why. Some scholars suggest it was a religious pivot. Others think it was an attempt to associate himself with Solomon's wisdom. You know, subtle marketing, like when you switch your Instagram handle to sound more mysterious. Regardless, nothing else changes. No wars, no coups, just a different signature on imperial decrees. You imagine the royal scribe sighing deeply and re-inking his pen. At night, you stroll through the palace gardens. The air smells of honeysuckle and politics left unfinished. A peacock struts by, completely unbothered. Somewhere, someone is reciting Hafez. You could swear you hear the Shah's slippers shuffle past. But maybe it's just the wind. You realize that, in an empire where drama is scarce, this stillness becomes its own kind of spectacle, like watching a candle that never flickers. Safe, predictable, almost holy in its stillness. You sit beneath a fig tree, the stars beginning to show above Isfahan. It's not a bad place to be forgotten by history. Not bad at all. You wake up, well, more like drift, into a morning that looks suspiciously like every other one in the Safavid court. The sun creeps through lattice windows, painting slow-moving squares on patterned carpets. You pad into the courtyard of the palace where nothing, and I mean nothing, is ever out of place. Not a leaf, not a shadow, not even the sigh of the chief eunuch. This is a kingdom defined by its commitment to serenity. What stands out most in Shah Safi II's reign is the stunning absence of big news. No invasions to fend off. No palaces on fire. No secret suns rising in rebellion. It's not that things don't happen, it's that nothing ever really escalates. You know that friend who manages to make even a missed train feel like a spa day? That's Safi II's entire reign. But oh, the carpets. You stroll through a workshop in Kashan where master weavers bend silently over massive looms. The Shah's court, while diplomatically dull, is artistically rich. Commission after commission floods the empire with masterpieces. Silk rugs so fine they seem woven from moonlight. And tiles in deep turquoise blues that look like someone bottled the sky and whispered it into clay. Historians still argue whether this explosion of domestic luxury was a conscious shift, a pivot from military expansion to cultural immortality, or just the natural outcome of boredom at the top. Either way, Safi II's reign becomes a golden age for the decorative arts. Not that he ever really takes credit. The man could stroll through a gallery of world-class miniatures and give you the same reaction he has to overcooked rice. One slightly raised eyebrow. And you can't ignore the tea. Endless trays of samovars, porcelain cups, and sugar cubes that look like tiny snowbricks. The court develops elaborate rituals around it. Each official visit includes not just tea, but a full tasting sequence, some of them lasting longer than the actual diplomacy. In this empire, you may not get a military alliance, but you will get second flush Darjeeling steeped for precisely 4 minutes. You spot a nobleman reclining under a cypress tree, swirling a tiny spoon in his tea. His hat alone could fund a school. But his main concern? Whether the pastry has enough rosewater. It's oddly hypnotic. No one's rushing. The politics here are slow-cooked, like lamb shanks left to stew under saffron and cloves. You get the feeling the Shah prefers it this way. One foreign envoy, let's call him Jean from France, because of course, once described the Safavid court as a magnificent lake whose surface is untouched by wind. Sounds poetic, sure, but also like a veiled complaint from a man hoping for a few more sword fights. Instead, Jean gets poems read aloud over fruit platters and discussions about cloud shapes. He returns to Paris with 4 rugs and mild emotional whiplash. What about the economy? You wonder? Oh, the economy. Stable, predictable, kind of like that cousin who always brings the same potato salad to every family event. Trade flourishes, especially the silk trade, which Safavid Iran practically monopolizes in the region. European merchants arrive in droves, half for business, half for the view. Isfahan becomes a crossroads of commerce and culture, even as its ruler remains more focused on religious fasting schedules than import tariffs. You peek into the imperial treasury. No one's throwing gold coins in the air or diving into piles of jewels like cartoon misers. But the vaults are full, the accountants methodical, and the financial records, written in looping Persian calligraphy, so beautiful you almost forget their ledgers. The coinage hasn't changed much in decades. Same image, same inscriptions. Apparently no one dared suggest a redesign, lest they disturb the imperial nap. And then there are the gardens. You meander into the Chehel Soton, the 40 columns palace garden. Reflected in its pool, 20 wooden pillars double themselves into 40, like an optical illusion built purely for serenity. Water channels murmur softly through flower beds. Pomegranates hang fat and heavy on the branches. A courtier nearby is reading a treatise on ethics written in rhyming verse, while a tortoise slowly investigates his sandals. The Shah himself? He's said to walk here just before dusk, hands clasped behind his back, lips moving in quiet prayer. A few claim he talks to the trees. You don't doubt it. They're probably the only ones who respond at his speed. One quirky tidbit? Apparently, Shah Safi II insisted that all official court clocks be slightly wrong, off by a few minutes in each direction. Why? To remind everyone that only God knows the true time. It's poetic, infuriating, and so incredibly on brand for a ruler whose legacy is basically, I came, I saw, I sipped tea. Meanwhile, in the provincial towns, things remain placid. Local governors enjoy unusual autonomy, partly because they're trusted, but mostly because no one in Isfahan can be bothered to micromanage. There are fewer revolts, not because people are thrilled, but because there's genuinely nothing worth getting riled up about. The empire's just functional enough to avoid anger, and just inert enough to discourage hope. You glance again at a map. The borders haven't budged in years. Not one province gained, not one city lost. The Safavid Empire under Safi II has become the geopolitical equivalent of a screensaver. And yet, within all this stillness, you sense something oddly heroic. It takes a certain talent, you think, to keep an empire so quietly intact. No boom, no bust, just a continuous, silk-lined lullaby played out across deserts and mountains and cities built from polished blue stone. As twilight descends on the palace once more, the lanterns flicker to life. There's dinner, rice with barberries, lamb skewers, cucumber yogurt. Nothing groundbreaking, nothing terrible. You imagine Shah Safi II somewhere behind those arches, eating in silence, grateful for another day of peace wrapped in the sound of rustling cypress leaves and not a single drum of war. You find yourself slipping quietly into the daily rhythm of palace life, a rhythm so slow it could be measured in tea refills. Today, you follow the drifting scent of sandalwood through long corridors to where the royal court gathers, not to plot or scheme or even decide anything, but mostly to exist. This is not a court of thunderous debate. It's more of a high-budget meditation retreat, with better turbans. The halls are padded with velvet, both literally and figuratively. No sharp edges, no sudden movements, and definitely no surprise reforms. Instead, there are bureaucrats gently nibbling pomegranate seeds, eunuchs adjusting incense burners with the precision of watchmakers, and poets lounging on embroidered cushions, whispering verses about the meaning of fog. You pass by a grand salon where decisions theoretically happen. A vizier is slowly reading a tax proposal aloud, not because it's contentious, but because he once trained as an actor and enjoys the cadence of long sentences. The Shah isn't here. He's in his private chambers, possibly writing a letter to God or maybe just reorganizing his calligraphy set. It's all very urgent. And yet, the machinery of state keeps humming. Behind this somnolent facade lies a surprisingly efficient administration. You spot a clerk reviewing land grants, another weighing coins to check for fraud. The Safavid court, during Safi II's reign, develops a reputation for meticulousness. Every decree is double-checked, every signature verified. Historians still argue whether this was due to institutional discipline or just a shared fear of disturbing the Shah's calm. You sit for a moment near the open terrace, where a group of astrologers has gathered. They're not predicting the fall of empires. They're charting moon phases to pick the best day to trim the royal beard. Their charts are beautiful, their robes even more so. And they argue so politely it's hard to tell when a debate begins or ends. One raises an eyebrow and softly utters, "Venus disagrees." Everyone nods solemnly. The court poet, a man named Zia, recites a quatrain that compares love to slow-boiled quince jam. Applause is light but sincere. Somewhere in the corner, a diplomat is slowly learning how to play the sitar. Because honestly, the workload isn't crushing, and this might be the only court in the world where forgetting to show up to a meeting results not in punishment, but in people quietly assuming you were probably meditating. Occasionally, a rumor of urgency drifts through. Perhaps a provincial governor is overtaxing the farmers, or a minor border scuffle has erupted into a stare down. You'd expect panic, but no. The Grand Vizier sighs, dips his quill in ink, and begins composing a letter that opens with 3 flowery lines about spring blossoms. The response will take weeks to arrive. No one minds. The empire, like a well-fed cat, turns slowly. There's even a department dedicated to dream interpretation. Yes, actual salaried officials whose job is to analyze the night visions of nobles. And on rare occasion, the Shah himself. One peculiar report from a court chronicler mentions Safi II dreaming of a fish swimming backward in a gold bowl. Scholars to this day debate whether it was a metaphor for divine wisdom, or just a comment on court decor. And then there's the fashion. Oh, the fashion. You wander through the royal wardrobe hall, where silks imported from China nestle beside locally dyed velvets. Turbans are starched to within an inch of architecture, and slippers are so curved at the toe they resemble question marks. You note that palace tailors are among the few truly busy workers here, constantly stitching, hemming, and arguing over shade differences that only exist in direct sunlight. You peek into the women's quarters, the Anderuni, only briefly, respectfully, and from a distance. It's a world unto itself, full of laughter, embroidery, philosophical debates, and occasional backgammon tournaments that somehow end in recited poetry. There's a rumor that one of the queen mothers once dictated a new embroidery style that swept through the empire faster than any royal decree. One quirky moment? An official holiday declared after a palace cat gave birth to 7 kittens on the steps of the Quran chamber. The kittens were named after constellations. A small marble plaque still marks the spot. The Shah reportedly visited them, petted one gently, and then returned to his tea. But don't mistake this gentle rhythm for complete emptiness. There are moments, rare and subtle, when the Shah does step forward. A decree to repair a flood-damaged aqueduct, a quiet donation to a Sufi order, a handwritten note to a dying vizier, said to contain a single line of poetic farewell. It's just that these gestures float through the empire like flower petals, noticeable only if you're paying very close attention. Historians debate whether the Shah's aloof style weakened or preserved the Safavid legacy. Did his passive court enable quiet corruption? Or was it a strategic trust in institutions, letting capable hands do their jobs without royal micromanagement? There's no consensus, but everyone agrees on one thing. This was a court unlike any other in the Muslim world. Equal parts Zen garden and paperwork warehouse. You return to the courtyard as evening descends. The fountains are lit by small oil lamps. Courtiers begin drifting off to their chambers. The Shah's slippered feet make no sound as he exits the prayer hall. No fanfare, no guards trailing behind, Just a man, cloaked in stillness, walking softly into another quiet night of history. You find a seat beneath an apricot tree, listening to the gentle rustle of silk, the hush of sandals on tile, and the last echoes of today's tea conversations. You've seen power wielded with brutality. But here, it's wrapped in velvet, spoken in whispers, and often forgotten entirely. And somehow, that's its own kind of wonder. You're up again, and today you're shadowing some of the empire's most well-traveled, and least exciting, figures, the foreign diplomats. Don't get too excited. These are not the sword-swinging, scroll-waving envoys of dramatic legend. These guys specialize in compliments, elaborate bows, and the fine art of not actually saying anything for weeks at a time. You shuffle beside the ambassador from the Mughal court as he carefully smooths the wrinkles from his robe before entering the hall of audiences. He's been waiting for this meeting for 3 days, not because the Shah was too busy, but because choosing the proper auspicious moment to host a guest is more complex than assembling IKEA furniture with no manual. Inside, the meeting is exactly what you'd expect. Ceremonial greetings, metaphor-laced greetings, gifts exchanged with two-handed reverence. The ambassador offers a jeweled hookah. The Safavid court presents a miniature painting of a nightingale on a tulip. No one mentions trade agreements. No one brings up territorial disputes. They don't need to. The real negotiation happens later, over dinner. And what a dinner! As you drift into the grand dining hall, your senses are met with rosewater steam, clinking silver, and the faint sounds of musicians plucking tar strings behind a silk screen. Dishes parade by. Saffron rice molded like golden pillows, grilled lamb so tender it sighs apart, and sweets that could double as jewelry. The diplomats sit cross-legged, chewing thoughtfully. Now and then, someone raises a point about caravan security or river access, but it's always disguised under 3 layers of compliment and a toast to the Shah's unshakable serenity. Historians still argue whether these meetings ever accomplished anything. Some say the court's emphasis on form over function led to missed opportunities. Others argue that the form was the function, by lulling visitors into a hazy blend of protocol and pistachios. Safi II's court kept everyone off balance and pleasantly non-confrontational. You sit in on a visit from a Russian envoy next. He looks mildly confused but utterly enchanted by the palace's scent of oud and soft cushions. He tries to explain his czar's interest in closer coordination on border matters. But by the time he finishes the sentence, someone is offering him a new robe, and his interpreter is whispering poetic compliments about Persian architecture. Before long, he's petting a peacock. There's a quiet brilliance to all this. The court avoids conflict not by being stronger, but by being slipperier. No one leaves angry. They just leave slightly dazed, slightly fatter, and unsure whether they just agreed to a treaty or adopted a decorative pillow. One fringe tidbit: a Venetian merchant once reported that the Safavid diplomats had a secret code: twists of the mustache, angle of bow, length of sip from teacup, that signaled real political meaning beneath the poetic babble. Some modern scholars dismiss this as fantasy. Others, well, they're still analyzing portraits for hidden eyebrow messages. But it's not just foreign diplomats being lulled into this decorative dream world. You peek in on the daily correspondence with provincial governors. Scrolls arrive by camel, carefully unrolled on velvet pillows. The messages are respectful, long-winded, and mostly status updates. The replies from court are even longer. No one seems eager to resolve things quickly. Decisions float gently down the bureaucratic stream like rose petals in a fountain. One day, a minor trade conflict with the Ottoman Empire begins to stir. Merchants in Tabriz complain about overzealous customs checks. The Shah's council meets. They talk for 2 hours about bird migration patterns and garden symmetry. Finally, someone drafts a letter with 12 lines of poetic apology and a postscript reminding the Ottomans of their shared love of mulberries. Conflict avoided. You'd think this level of avoidance might provoke more aggressive neighbors. But no. The Ottomans are busy with their own court dramas, and the Mughals are going through a leadership squabble. The Safavid Empire becomes that quiet neighbor who never mows the lawn but somehow never gets reported to the Wa either. You follow one final envoy, this time from the Dutch East India Company. He brings silver coins, spices, and high hopes. He leaves with 3 rugs, a new nickname, and absolutely no idea whether his trade request was accepted. He bows at the exit, repeating the phrase, a delightful uncertainty, under his breath like a man trying to convince himself everything's fine. And somehow, it is. You stroll out to the palace's exterior wall as the evening call to prayer rings across Isfahan. There's no shouting, no horse-mounted messengers galloping into the courtyard with urgent dispatches. Just the soft rustle of wind in the cypress trees and the quiet murmur of a court that's mastered the diplomatic art of pleasant procrastination. No wars begin, no treaties collapse, the world turns slowly, and the Safavid Empire drifts peacefully in its orbit. It's Shah content to let others chase glory while he perfects the angle of his prayer mat. Today, you slip into a chamber that smells faintly of ink, rose oil, and a little too much lavender. It's a room with one window, dozens of pillows, and absolutely no pressure to accomplish anything before lunch or after. You've arrived at the heart of the Safavid Empire's deepest passion during Shah Safi II's reign, the fine art of doing nothing at all. You settle cross-legged beside a scribe who has been delicately outlining the same verse of poetry for 3 days. Not because he's slow, no. This is intentional. There's a kind of reverence in slowness here. Rushing is for barbarians. In this palace, to complete something too quickly is to insult its beauty. The Shah, you've noticed, has taken this philosophy to regal extremes. He's not idle. Exactly. He's ceremonially unhurried. And under his direction, the court turns daily in a dance of gentle, almost purposeful inaction. You'd swear time itself slows here. Its hands folding neatly behind its back to enjoy a glass of date juice. What fills the hours, you ask? Calligraphy, mountains of it, letters to no one, verses copied simply because they're pretty. It's not uncommon for a nobleman to spend 2 weeks writing one perfectly shaped olive. And this isn't laziness, it's devotion. Art for art's sake, paper for the gods. You examine a manuscript in progress, a copy of the Conference of the Birds. It's half finished, each line lovingly inked in lapis blue, surrounded by tiny gold flourishes. The court miniature painter pauses often to hum to himself and sip quince tea. A fly buzzes across the page and is shooed away like an impatient messenger. Meanwhile, in the garden, a courtier is composing a letter to the Shah praising the geometry of a particular rosebush. Not requesting funds, not reporting trouble, just admiring a shrub. Historians still argue whether such correspondence was expected or if people just liked having something harmless to write. The library is another haven of glorious inertia. Books are everywhere, stacked, sprawled, wrapped in silk. Some are read, most are admired. You hear a noble sigh dreamily while gently thumbing through an illustrated medical text from India. He has no intention of becoming a doctor. He just likes the diagrams. One quirky detail? It's rumored the Shah kept a private list of tasks to delay until absolutely necessary. At the top, appointing a new governor to a troublesome province in the east. That post remained vacant for 5 years. The region, oddly, managed just fine. Some scholars believe the governorless system may have worked better than the official one. An accident? A quiet stroke of genius? The debate lingers. You follow a young court page, his job, ensuring the ink in the Shah's calligraphy set remains perfectly viscous. That's it. His official title translates roughly to attendant of the flow. He takes this duty very seriously and once rejected an entire shipment of ink because it felt emotionally rushed. In another chamber, musicians are tuning instruments for a performance that might happen tomorrow. Or not at all. The rehearsal has been going on for 11 days. No notes yet, just tuning. They're aiming for what they call the silence between notes. One lute player has achieved this so perfectly he hasn't plucked a string since last Thursday. You start to feel yourself slipping into the rhythm of it. There's something hypnotic about this deeply ceremonial idleness. It's not a vacuum. It's not laziness. It's a culture of stillness. Movement here isn't just discouraged, it's considered suspicious. Even the imperial cooks embody this ethos. They debate the appropriate simmering time for a yogurt stew as if the fate of the universe depends on it. A pot of lentils has been bubbling for hours while the chef recites Rumi beside it. You taste the result and, okay, it's worth it. One mainstream historical observation? Under Safi II, the empire's infrastructure surprisingly holds together. Roads stay clear, water channels flow, trade hums along, all without the Shah lifting more than a quill. It's almost eerie how effective the empire remains with a monarch who seems mildly allergic to exertion. You peek into a council meeting. The agenda? None. The topic? Open-ended. The solution? Unnecessary. A vizier reads aloud a list of potential discussion points, then announces they'll reconvene next week to choose which one to begin. The Shah sends a polite thank you note from his bath. Yet, there's wisdom in this passivity. The court avoids mistakes simply by avoiding actions. No hasty reforms, no sweeping declarations, no dramatic purges. You realize, the fewer decisions made, the fewer disasters invited. A fringe theory suggests that this might have been intentional, that the Shah adopted stillness as a form of governance, governing by not governing. Let the system run itself. Let tradition be the compass, like a gardener who waters the roots but never prunes the leaves. You walk by the Shah's chamber. The door is slightly ajar. Inside, he's sitting in front of a mirror, writing a poem to his own reflection. It's not vain, it's meditative. He writes, pauses, rewrites, and finally sets down the pen. Smiling faintly, you don't dare disturb him. He's clearly having a productive hour. Later, at dusk, you join a group of nobles watching fish drift in the palace pond. One begins an anecdote. It's a slow one. 3 people doze off halfway through. No one is offended. The story concludes with a moral about patience and fish scales. Everyone nods. One courtier claps once. You feel oddly fulfilled. As the stars rise, you understand something profound. In a world that celebrates movement and urgency, the Safavid court under Shah Safi II made a radical choice: to pause, to breathe, to admire the curl of a letter or the color of a petal. And in that stillness, they found their identity. It's not thrilling, it's not flashy, but it is strangely, deeply satisfying. You're still here, drifting, gliding, glancing at the sun inching across the Isfahan sky like it, too, has nowhere to be. Today you explore a topic that most empires dread but Shah Safi II treats like background music. The slow passing of time without any urgent consequence. The calm before, well, even more calm. You're holding a map, or rather, you're holding several, because the Safavid cartographers are really into their detail. River curves are measured with obsessive precision. Caravan routes are lovingly annotated. But the borders? Oh, the borders haven't moved in decades. Not 1 inch. The empire is a perfect study in geopolitical inertia. You try squinting at the edge of the Caspian Sea. Maybe the Russians encroached? Nope. You glance south toward the Persian Gulf. The Portuguese have long been booted out. But nothing new's happening there either. The empire sits in a kind of suspended animation, ringed by neighbors too preoccupied, or bored, to do much poking. Historians still argue whether this eerie stasis was good governance or accidental stalling. Some say it was a triumph. The Shah maintained peace and continuity in an age of constant upheaval. Others claim it was decay hiding behind decorative tiles. A few even joke that the empire entered a meditative coma and just forgot to wake up. You head to a strategy chamber where generals theoretically meet. It smells faintly of dust and old armor. There's a table with little wooden cavalry pieces still set in formation from 6 years ago. No one's touched them. You see a note written in the margin of a parchment. reschedule war game, after fig harvest. And yet, the army is still here. Maintained, paid, trained, kind of. You watch a group of soldiers practicing archery on a lazy slope outside the city. The arrows fly true, if not particularly fast. Their captain explains that morale is high, mainly because they haven't had to fight anyone in a long time. There's one brief military campaign during the Shah's reign, very brief. A tribal skirmish in the northeast. It's notable mostly because it ends faster than expected when both sides forget what they were arguing about. One chronicler described it as an event so mild. The sheep grazing nearby did not bother to look up. You peek into the imperial armory. Everything's in perfect order. The sabers are polished, the bows strung. There's even a stack of cannonballs painted with floral designs, because sure, why not be tasteful about war preparations you'll never use? Meanwhile, back at court, there's mild excitement about a new horse gifted to the Shah. It's a white stallion with blue-gray spots. They name it Chuman and parade it through the palace grounds like a royal birth. No one rides it. That would be rude. It's mostly photographed, okay, painted, grazing majestically under almond trees. You start to notice something else. Boredom as an aesthetic. The palace isn't just quiet, it's designed to be quiet. The fountains don't gurgle, they murmur. The calligraphy isn't bold, it's soothing. Even the tile mosaics seem arranged to lull the eye into gentle spirals. There's a philosophy here. Keep things stable by keeping them sleepy. One quirky detail? A visiting poet once proposed renaming the capital from Isfahan to Isfa. No fun. The court didn't laugh. They nodded solemnly and asked for clarification in iambic verse. You wander through a garden expansion project. It's been in progress for years. There's a perfectly raked plot of dirt and a pile of decorative bricks resting beneath a fig tree. Occasionally someone places a stone, then breaks for mint tea. The project isn't behind schedule, it simply exists in its own separate calendar, which scholars refer to as eventually. And yet, the people don't seem unhappy. In fact, the urban middle class is thriving. Markets buzz with activity. Potters, weavers, metalworkers. All content in a system that demands very little change and offers very little chaos. You watch a craftsman carve mother of pearl into a jewelry box lid. He hums a tune that hasn't changed in centuries. Even religious life, so often a source of tension, is remarkably even-keeled during this time. The Shah is devout, yes, but not aggressively so. His policies are measured, his proclamations soft-spoken. Friday sermons lean more toward philosophical riddles than political thunder. One mullah is known for beginning each sermon with a 10-minute meditation on the shape of clouds. The royal astrologers, however, are a different story. They've been predicting an omen for years, a great transformation, a fiery change, a divine signal. It just keeps not happening. They've started recycling old horoscopes, hoping no one notices. Mars moves westward with the patience of an old cat, becomes a yearly favorite. Historians often refer to this period as a prelude to decline, which feels rude but not inaccurate. There's a quiet erosion happening. Small inefficiencies, overlooked appointments, regional lords growing a bit too bold. But it's all so gradual. You could miss it if you blink too slowly. It's not decay. Exactly, it's elegant entropy. One mainstream historical fact that still surprises modern scholars, despite his disengaged style. Shah Safi II manages to maintain diplomatic relations with multiple empires without any real conflict. He responds to most foreign requests within 3 lunar cycles and includes a poem in every dispatch. It's bureaucracy as lullaby. By now, you realize the empire doesn't run despite the calm. It runs because of it. When nothing shakes the foundation, people stop worrying about earthquakes. The system, though creaky and maybe a little drowsy, hums along like a well-fed lion, one that yawns a lot but never roars. You end your day at a caravanserai just outside the capital. Traders unload goods under lantern light, silks from China, spices from India, glass from Venice. The Safavid Empire might be still, but it is not disconnected. The world comes to it, not the other way around. As you lie down on a woven mat beneath the stars, the silence wraps around you, not oppressive, not empty, just settled. The Shah is likely asleep, the empire at peace, the guards too bored to blink. And somewhere, in a chamber lit by a single oil lamp, a court scribe is still finishing that one verse he started last week. You rise with the scent of morning bread drifting through the palace air. Ready, though that might be too ambitious a word, to explore the rebellious undercurrent of the empire. Except, you quickly learn, even the rebellions under Shah Safi II's reign are a bit sleepy. You walk through the records hall, where dusty scrolls record decades of official complaints, minor uprisings, and village-level discontent. It's all there. A rice tax protest in Gilan, a tribal leader's refusal to send his annual tribute, a baker accused of overpricing sesame rolls. These are not the flames of revolution. They're more like warm coals someone forgot to fan. One famous uprising in the province of Fars involved 30 armed men, 2 broken carts, and an ox. No fatalities, no hostages, and by the time soldiers arrived, everyone had gone home for lunch. Historians still argue whether it even qualifies as an actual rebellion or just a particularly bad family reunion. You're guided through the story of a Sufi sect that openly criticized the court's apathy. Their protest? A week-long silence vigil while seated in the bazaar. It's hard to tell whether anyone noticed. A court official later referred to it as a rather productive week for noise-sensitive merchants. And yet, as tranquil as these dissent events sound, they do exist. Every empire, no matter how drowsy, gathers its share of grumbles. But under Safi II, these sparks rarely catch. Why? Because the Shah's approach to governance doesn't provoke them. He's not out there building statues of himself, demanding new taxes, or banning traditional songs. In fact, his most controversial act may have been discontinuing a particular style of court music, which he found melancholy to an impractical degree. You peek into the corner of the palace where the Security Council, such as it is, meets. There's a pile of sealed reports, most unopened. A captain reports a group of smugglers operating near the Caspian. The vizier nods thoughtfully and suggests sending someone, eventually. The smugglers, you're told, were later seen gifting apricots to passing travelers. National threat averted. There's a quiet genius at work here. The lack of outrage comes not from suppression, but from this strange, soft indifference. If you're a would-be rebel, it's hard to stay angry when the crown doesn't argue back. There's nothing to overthrow when no one's actively throwing anything. You journey next to a village on the empire's edge. The people are poor, yes, but peaceful. They pay taxes irregularly. No one yells. No one loots. One elder tells you, with a shrug, they forget us. We forget them. It works. You nod. It does. One quirky moment? A provincial garrison once sent an urgent request for reinforcements, only for the message to be misrouted and arrive 4 months late. By then, the problem, a goat-related border dispute, had resolved itself. The Shah reportedly read the letter, smiled faintly, and asked for more honey in his tea. Historians still puzzle over this tension-free model. Could it be that the mere absence of ambition at the top leads to a trickle-down tranquility? Perhaps people, when not poked or prodded, simply chill. It's not a policy, it's a vibe. You hear of a governor in the Northwest who begins styling himself as protector of the faithful, a move that might signal rebellion elsewhere. Here, it prompts a politely worded letter from the court reminding him of the empire's shared values and inviting him to tea. He accepts. Crisis over. You might assume the army would grow restless during this period of profound inaction. And yes, some commanders do complain, in the most dignified, undercooked way. One general writes to the Shah asking for permission to march in a direction of his choosing. The response: so long as you return in time for Nowruz. He does. No shots fired. You follow a priest from the Armenian quarter of Isfahan as he delivers a sermon on divine stillness. His words echo through the quiet cathedral. His congregation includes Muslim visitors, merchants, and a bored dog. No guards, no surveillance. The coexistence here is surprisingly soft-edged, rooted in mutual fatigue with confrontation. In another curious twist, a poet's satire criticizing the court is published and widely circulated. It's called The Slumbering Peacock and it's biting, clever, and only slightly treasonous. The Shah's response? He commissions the poet to write another one, about carpets this time. The poet obliges. The first piece is never banned, just quoted less frequently during public meals. One rebellion does get mildly close to serious. A minor prince, convinced he deserves more land, rallies a few hundred followers. There's marching, there's chanting, then it rains, supplies run out. The prince sneezes for 3 days and loses morale. He returns to court under his own power and is gently scolded with a new appointment as inspector of ceremonial umbrellas. You begin to understand something profound about this empire. Unrest doesn't thrive in still water. It needs agitation, tension. In Safi II, he offers none. No dramatic edicts, no zealous reforms, just the hum of fountains and the occasional note from an underused minister. One mainstream fact rarely emphasized: the Safavid bureaucracy, though snail-paced, is thorough. Corruption is low, not because of fear, but because no one wants the paperwork that comes with bribery. The system is self-regulating by sheer disinterest in extra steps. You end your day on the palace roof, where a servant is watching for smoke signals, not for danger, but because someone's lighting incense in the wrong direction again. Below, the city murmurs. Somewhere, someone's protesting something, very softly, into a napkin. And that's just about as fiery as things get. You descend a narrow staircase beneath the palace's eastern wing. The air smells faintly of horse leather, dried fruit, and that familiar mix of dust and dignity that comes from a room no one really cleans, but everyone respects. Welcome to the royal hobby chamber. Yes, it's a thing. And here is where you finally catch a glimpse of Shah Safi II's true passion, doing just enough to call it a pastime. At first glance, the chamber is an eclectic museum of maybe useful objects. Falconry gloves hang beside a half-assembled miniature ship. A shelf houses a collection of marbled ink bottles labeled in ornate calligraphy. Sky at dawn. Whispered lilac, almost pomegranate. You could swear one simply says, mood. Today, the Shah is occupied, which is to say, he's sitting on a low cushion, holding a carved wooden flute. Not playing it. A court musician is nearby, gently humming the notes the Shah might play, should the mood ever arrive. This counts as progress. And then there's the tulip bed. You're led to a narrow walled garden where the Shah has personally arranged rows of tulips by color, height, and what he once described as emotional intensity. One courtier swears the Shah spoke to each bulb during planting season. Another claims he wept when a squirrel dug up a crimson one prematurely. Either way, no one touches this garden without 3 written permissions and a small poem. Historians still debate whether the Shah's immersion in hobbies was escapism or subtle strategy. One camp argues that his detachment from court affairs allowed ministers to operate efficiently. The other believes his hobbies were just a prettier word for procrastination. And then there's the fringe theory that says the Shah was conducting some private, symbolic performance, each tulip a political metaphor. This is promptly ignored by most scholars. But you can't help glancing twice at that row of white ones leaning just slightly west. You're shown the falcons next. Sleek, golden-eyed birds perched in perfect silence. The royal falconer explains that while the Shah rarely flies them anymore, he does like to have long, silent conversations with them. One bird is named Reflection. Another, Minister. You sense a theme. In a side room, the Shah's calligraphy hobby is on full display. Scrolls upon scrolls of perfectly inked prayers, poetic verses, End. Oddly, several pages repeating only the phrase, "The rose knows when to bloom." The court librarian keeps these in a special archive labeled Meditations. Royal Misk. One mainstream historical record mentions the Shah's dedication to the art of shadow puppetry. Yes, he apparently commissioned a set of ornate puppets, lions, camels, a rather judgmental-looking owl, and occasionally invited close advisors to witness philosophical dramas performed by firelight. The scripts, written by the Shah himself. Titles include The Sultan and the Sandal and Debate in the Mulberry Grove. The messages? Always open to interpretation, always featuring an ambiguous tortoise. Outside the hobby chamber, there's a courtyard where the Shah occasionally paints watercolors. He doesn't paint people, only clouds. One piece, still hanging in the council hall, shows 33 shades of beige and a single drop of gold. When asked its title, the Shah replied, "Thursday. You overhear two attendants debating the Shah's current passion project. A pigeon tower made entirely from old correspondence scrolls. It said the pigeons inside only coo in couplets. You wander over. They do, in fact, sound unusually poetic." One curious detail. The Shah apparently took up mosaic tiling briefly, his attempt, you're told, is embedded in a wall near the palace baths. Unlike the masterwork surrounding it, his tiles are slightly uneven, forming what appears to be a frowning peach. No one has the heart to correct it. And what about sports? You follow a group of nobles to a polo field on the edge of the city. It's overgrown. One mallet rests forgotten on a bench. You ask if the Shah plays. The response? He prefers to observe the potential of the game. No one really knows what that means. One day, a rumor spreads. The Shah is working on a grand treatise combining astrology, gardening, and imperial strategy. Everyone waits. Months pass. The final product turns out to be 3 sentences about the noble dignity of daffodils. It is copied, gilded, and placed in the National Archives with reverence. Historians note that this reign sees an unusual amount of time and resources spent on personal reflection projects. One scribe catalogs 119 such hobbies, including sketching with powdered saffron, rearranging spices by scent, naming clouds, listening to wind chimes in different outfits. You're not sure whether to be baffled or deeply relaxed. But here's the twist. Through these soft pursuits, the Shah somehow keeps his inner circle loyal. Ministers feel unpressured. Nobles feel unthreatened. Everyone has space to breathe, nap, and occasionally write a song about fountains. The empire remains balanced, not in spite of this quiet eccentricity, but because of it. As twilight falls, you join the Shah in the courtyard. He's tracing his finger along a lattice pattern in the stone floor. Not speaking, just feeling the texture. A servant quietly brings him honeyed almonds. A sparrow lands beside his sandal and hops once, as if acknowledging the vibe. You sit nearby, watch the sky change colors, and realize, in a world of rulers obsessed with expansion and control, this Shah chose a different path, one of tulips, shadows, clouds, and meaning tucked between silences. You're still not sure what the frowning peach means, but somehow, it feels just right. You wake up to the soft creak of scaffolding, not the dramatic kind, with hammering and shouted orders, but the half-hearted, artisanal kind, where workers sip tea between adjustments. Today, you're strolling through one of Shah Safi II's many building projects, grand in vision, modest in execution, and extremely decorative in intention. You begin in the shadow of what was supposed to be the new pavilion of pearled tranquility. Yes, that was the actual working title. On paper, it was a marvel, multiple domes, mirror halls, a rooftop reflecting pool shaped like a nightingale in flight. What stands before you now? 4 arches, a gently leaning column, and a marble bench someone's been using for bread picnics. A court architect meets you with a scroll under one arm and a mild expression of defeat. It is evolving, he says, gesturing to a pile of tiles still wrapped in cloth. He then excuses himself to measure the wind direction, his current precondition for deciding where the main entrance might eventually go. You flip through his plans. They're exquisite. Gold ink, scaled renderings, even tiny watercolor humans sipping from ornamental fountains. But here's the thing. None of them are dated. Apparently, the Shah didn't believe in deadlines. His philosophy? All beauty arrives in its own time. Construction teams took this deeply to heart. Some are still arriving. One mainstream observation from European travelers. The Safavid Empire during Safi II's reign saw an uptick in unfinished projects. Mosques without domes, baths without ceilings, caravanserais built halfway, then abandoned because someone rethought the floor plan. It's not a funding issue. The treasury could handle it. It's more like the ambition burned out halfway through a cup of tea. You enter the shell of a bathhouse, where blue tiles are stacked like forgotten chess pieces. One tilemaster tells you they were instructed to create a mosaic of a serene phoenix looking sideways. They're still debating which way counts as sideways for a mythical bird. And yet, it's all gorgeous. You step into a nearly completed garden just south of Isfahan. It's walled with cedar and plane trees, and in its center lies a dry channel where water was supposed to flow in spirals like poetry in motion. Instead, it's filled with smooth stones someone's arranged into a quote from Rumi. You pause to admire it anyway. This wasn't incompetence. This was aesthetic overreach. The Shah wasn't obsessed with utility. He was entranced by the idea of places so beautiful they never needed to be finished. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate statement on impermanence or just a royal case of creative attention deficit. You pass a field of partially carved marble lions. They were intended for a ceremonial gate, but now serve as surprisingly popular seating for afternoon poetry readings. One lion wears a cap someone left during last Nowruz. No one removes it. It somehow completes the sculpture. A fringe tale you hear from a city mason. The Shah once halted an entire palace project because he felt the rhythm of the construction disrupted the sound of the prayer call echoing through the city. Instead, he commissioned a pavilion just to amplify the echo. That pavilion? Still unfinished, but the echo is lovely. And it's not just buildings. You tour an imperial canal that was supposed to link 3 gardens in a loop symbolic of paradise. The canal was dug, lined with polished stone, and filled. Once, then the Shah decided he preferred the natural chaos of water. The canal dried up. Today, it's filled with jasmine bushes and the occasional lizard with impeccable taste. You visit an art school once designed to rival the great academies of the empire. Its walls are painted with dreamlike murals. The classrooms? Empty. The last students left 5 years ago after realizing none of the instructors actually taught. They simply demonstrated brushstrokes once a week and told students to feel the pigment. One of your favorite moments comes when you find a doorway, not attached to anything, just a finely carved, freestanding arch placed in the middle of a meadow. Through it, you see the horizon. A plaque nearby reads, "The threshold of what might have been." You sit beside it for a while. You understand. The Shah occasionally visited these half-built spaces. He would walk quietly, hands clasped behind his back, nodding approvingly at the symmetry of empty courtyards. One minister recalled him standing before an unpainted dome for a full hour before saying, "This silence is almost blue." One mainstream document from a royal surveyor lists 43 state-sponsored construction projects that remained in artistic development limbo between 1670 and 1690. Some remained untouched for so long they became parks. Others were absorbed into new designs. One mosque eventually became a pigeon observatory. You also notice how these spaces are used. Children play among the column stubs. Poets hold salons in the shade of unbuilt wings. Even the peacocks have moved in, strutting through the marble footprints of rooms that never had walls. It's oddly communal, a kingdom of half-dreams turned playground. But not everyone approved. A few court conservatives worried that this aesthetic indecision weakened the empire's spirit. They called for completion mandates, and urged the Shah to select a single project to fully finish. His response? He asked them all to write essays explaining which shade of blue best represented national stability. He never read them. You end your day on the balcony of an incomplete guest palace. There are no walls, just thin wooden beams and a few rugs laid out for comfort. Below you, the city flickers with oil lamps. Someone plays a flute in the garden. The sound floats upward, caught in the rafters of a roof that never got tiled. And as you lean back, staring at a ceiling of stars instead of plaster, you realize, maybe some structures are meant to be unfinished. Maybe the beauty lies in the imagining, not the arrival. And maybe, just maybe, the Shah knew that all along. You rise slowly today, greeted not by the clang of bells or shouts from battlements, but by the low murmur of a scholarly debate about whether angels have scented breath. Welcome to the religious life of Shah Safi II's court, a landscape as peaceful as a bowl of warm milk and as fiery as, well, the soft glow of a lantern politely refusing to burn too brightly. Today's destination, the Jame Mosque of Isfahan, a marvel of architecture, yes, but also a listening post for theology conducted at a volume just above a whisper. You cross the courtyard, sunlight pooling like honey on the stones, as students in soft robes gather around a mulberry tree, discussing the proper metaphysical weight of a generous act. Under Safi II, religion is present, but not insistent. You don't see mobs or purges, nor fanatical sermons with foaming mouths. Instead, you see scholars sipping tea while comparing footnotes. The Shah, deeply devout, is more of a devotional minimalist. He attends prayers, funds mosques, and reads scripture daily, but he's never once waved a sword to prove his faith. Historians still argue whether this gentle approach was born of wisdom or simply exhaustion. Was it a strategic way to unify diverse Islamic voices under the Safavid Shia banner? Or just a sleepy king preferring personal piety to public theater? Either way, the result is the same. A theological environment more like a debate club in a teahouse than a firebrand rally. You attend a royal-sponsored religious symposium. The setting? A lush garden with orange blossoms, silk cushions, and sweet almond pastries arranged like flower petals. A Sufi sheikh recites poetry from a scroll while a jurist gently disputes his interpretation, not with fury, but with a laugh and a counter-couplet. And yes, there are divisions. Shia orthodoxy remains the state religion. The Shah supports clerics, maintains Shia rituals, and insists on Friday sermons that mention his name in prayer. But you also notice how many debates are ended not with verdicts, but with shared pomegranates and promises to revisit the topic next season. You wander through the city's theological schools, madrasas wrapped in turquoise tiles. In one, a student has drawn a diagram of divine light using colored sand. In another, you find a note pinned to the wall reading, "Truth is patient. Let it finish its nap first." It's unclear if this is a proverb or just someone's passive-aggressive response to last week's argument. One quirky example of this relaxed religiosity? The Shah is rumored to have hosted a fasting dinner, where scholars were invited to break their fast while simultaneously debating whether dreams during Ramadan counted as unconscious sins. One cleric fell asleep mid-rebuttal. He later claimed it was a demonstration. But it's not all soft sandals and moonlit arguments. There are moments of tension. A traveling preacher stirs up a crowd in Tabriz with a fiery sermon condemning secular poets. The court response? Not imprisonment, not banishment. The Shah sends a poet to attend his next sermon and take notes. 3 days later, the preacher's tone softens, his beard trimmed, and his next lecture is about the virtue of lyrical rhythm. Historians point out that under previous Safavid rulers, especially Shah Abbas, the first religious intolerance was weaponized politically. Sunnis, Sufis, Christians, Jews, all had rough periods. But Safi II seems disinterested in relighting those torches. You pass a Jewish merchant district where a synagogue quietly conducts a wedding. No guards, no spies, just candles and singing. You meet a wandering dervish with bells sewn into his robe. He tells you a story, possibly invented, of once meeting the Shah disguised as a gardener. They spoke for hours about rose care and the meaning of silence in worship. He listens like water, the dervish says, doesn't stir unless stirred. You pass through a Zoroastrian neighborhood where fire temples still glow behind thick walls. There's little interaction with the court, but also no pressure to disappear. The priest nods to you, then returns to feeding the sacred flame, a small flicker, stubbornly alive in the grand stillness of the city. Inside the palace, you witness the Shah's private devotions. He kneels alone on a carpet, whispering prayers into his cupped hands. No audience, no performance, just quiet communion. His favorite Quran, you're told, is annotated with pressed flower petals, some so old they've turned blue. And then there's the issue of end times. Yes, even in a reign this calm, someone's got to worry about the apocalypse. A fringe sect in the East declares that a comet seen last winter is proof the hour approaches. The Shah's response? He asks the royal astronomers to chart it. When they do, they conclude it's moving away from the empire, not toward. Problem solved. The sect dissolves after its leader decides to pursue gardening. You attend a sermon at the Grand Mosque where the Imam delivers a 90-minute lecture on humility. The only time he raises his voice is when a pigeon lands on the pulpit. He scolds it gently. The crowd applauds. The pigeon flutters away, unimpressed, and you begin to understand. Here, faith is not a performance. It's a hum beneath the surface, a part of daily life, like breath, or the scent of cardamom in the morning breeze. It's woven into rugs, whispered into wells, and stitched into the hems of children's clothing. One final note. During a festival of Ashura, commemorating the martyrdom of Hussein, you expect grief and fury. What you witness instead is candlelight, soft chanting, and poetry so mournful it folds the night in half. No swords, no violence, just a collective ache that feels almost healing. You leave the mosque under a sky bruised purple with twilight. The city exudes a gentle reverence, not loud, not forced, just present, and above it all, in a chamber lit by one flickering lamp, the Shah adds another line to his calligraphy practice. Faith is not a flame. It is the warmth that remains when the fire has gone. You begin your day not in a garden or a mosque, but somewhere altogether more powerful, the records hall of the Safavid Empire. A place with more influence than an army and less fanfare than a baker's shop. Welcome to the true throne behind the throne, the Safavid bureaucracy, where decisions move like molasses but somehow always land exactly where they're supposed to. You push open a thick cedar door to find a sea of scrolls, ledgers, stamps, and spectacled scribes hunched over writing desks like monks in a calligraphy cult. There is no royal music here, no scent of incense, no bursts of laughter, just the subtle scratching of 1,000 quills and the occasional polite cough. This is where the empire is actually run. The Shah may reign with stillness, but behind that stillness hums a hive of scribes, clerks, secretaries, and record keepers who can quote land ownership law by memory and match ink shades to dynastic eras. One scribe is rumored to have memorized 843 taxation codes on a dare. He now corrects his own dreams with footnotes. Historians still argue whether this sprawling bureaucratic machine arose from brilliant planning or sheer necessity. Some suggest it was built to offset Safi II's lack of engagement. Others think it evolved naturally as ministers began covering for his peaceful pauses. Either way, it works, and it works eerily well. You pause beside a bureaucrat weighing coins on a tiny brass scale. He checks each one against a master imprint, marks it with a dot of crimson ink, then places it into a velvet-lined drawer labeled acceptably genuine, spring batch. His tea remains untouched. He hasn't blinked in 6 minutes. One official is drafting a letter to a grain merchant 4 provinces away, requesting clarification on whether his signature last winter included a hidden ligature that could imply a delivery promise. Yes, The grammar of bureaucracy is a serious business. He's triple-checking it with a reference copy from 1623. And you learn this isn't just about paperwork. It's about power distribution. You're introduced to the Vizier of Quills, an old man whose beard is longer than some dynasties. His authority doesn't come from swords or soldiers. It comes from his ability to stall decisions indefinitely with polite inquiries and tactical ambiguity. No one dares challenge him, mostly because they know he has a copy of everything. Everything. You discover a secret room called the Silent Archive. It's rumored to contain the original tax maps of the empire, drawn in gold ink on gazelle parchment, and never once updated because, frankly, no one wants to be the person who touches them. You peek inside. The air smells like reverence and a little bit of goat. One mainstream fact rarely discussed in textbooks. The Safavid bureaucracy recorded not only economic and political affairs, but dreams. Yes, dream logs were maintained for high-ranking officials and the Shah himself. Interpreters analyzed them, cross-referenced them with astrology charts, and sometimes used them to time decrees. One especially famous record includes a nobleman dreaming of a watermelon growing on a minaret, later interpreted as a sign to delay land reform. Land reform was, indeed, delayed. You follow a junior clerk named Farid as he delivers correspondence. His path takes him through 5 chambers, 2 courtyards, and 1 room with nothing but quill sharpening tools. He finally arrives at the vizier's desk, bows, and presents a single wax-sealed letter. The vizier opens it, nods, and files it in a drawer labeled Responses Deferred Until Ramadan. That drawer is full. Even the royal edicts, known as firmans, go through a beautification process before being read aloud to the public. Each is written in elegant Nastaliq script, sometimes with tiny flourishes shaped like tulip petals. You read one that simply postpones a harvest levy. It looks like it could hang in a museum. A fringe detail that delights you. Certain scrolls are scented. That's right, a lemon-scented decree once denoted a request to resolve trade issues. Rose-scented ones meant ceremonial updates. Jasmine was reserved for messages involving health and well-being. One clerk confesses he once used clove oil by mistake and accidentally sent a marriage proposal to the wrong province. Despite the quiet, there is intrigue here. You spot a clerk, accidentally, swapping 2 scrolls with identical headings. Minutes later, a debate erupts over wheat distribution in Ardabil. The vizier diffuses it by ordering an audit. You learn that audit in Safavid code also means, let's forget this ever happened and share pistachios. But perhaps most fascinating is the balance this bureaucracy holds with the monarchy. The Shah signs documents, yes, but only after days, or weeks, of massaging by ministers, scribes, and scribbled margin notes that read like a polite war of passive resistance. He once rejected a tax decree not by veto, but by, accidentally, returning it with his teacup placed on the ink. Message received. One memorable scene. A ceremonial annual review of tax performance. Rather than a tense boardroom meeting, it unfolds as a picnic beneath cypress trees. Regional governors present embroidered ledgers, perform poetic summaries of their budgets, and occasionally sing. One governor is applauded for a verse that rhymes, drought, with doubt. Everyone claps. Numbers are approved. You end your day in the seal room, where every final document is pressed with the imperial stamp. There are 12 different seals for various levels of urgency. The fastest, a silver crescent. The slowest, a sun rising over a sleeping cat. Today, the cat wins. And as you step out into the hallway, past shelves of untouched proposals and memoranda marked, under spiritual consideration, you realize, in this empire, bureaucracy isn't just red tape, it's the velvet net holding everything together. Not loud, not fast, but quietly, constantly, functional. Above all, you remember what one clerk whispered as you passed him earlier that morning. Kings rule with crowns. We rule with commas. You find yourself in the quieter wing of the palace today, not the grand halls, not the archives, Not even the whispering gardens. No, this is the residential maze where things are less gold leaf glamour and more embroidered side eyes. Welcome to the royal family quarters, where dynastic drama unfolds, very, very slowly. You walk through a corridor lined with low windows and decorative latticework. Outside, sparrows hop between citrus trees. Inside, members of the Shah's extended family go about their days with such intense politeness. It feels vaguely threatening. A prince is having his robe adjusted by a tailor while his cousin watches and compliments the stitching, every word oozing with the sugar of carefully veiled suspicion. Here's the truth. Even in a sleepy empire, family tension never fully sleeps. The Safavid court may be peaceful on paper, but the royal family is a slow-burn soap opera, more subtle than most, but no less tangled. You meet Prince Mirza, a nephew with precisely the right amount of ambition to make everyone nervous but not enough to do anything about it. He spends his mornings practicing poetry, his afternoons drinking almond milk, and his evenings reminding people he could rule if he had to. Everyone nods, then immediately changes the subject to gardening. There's also Princess Layla, the Shah's cousin, who's known more for her veiled insults than her embroidery. At a dinner you're invited to, she compliments the Shah's silence as the most intelligent policy ever voiced. A courtier chokes on a fig. No one reacts. Historians still argue whether Shah Safi II's disinterest in politics created a power vacuum within his own family. Did his passive style encourage nobles and relatives to quietly jockey for influence? Or did his serene presence act as a lid, keeping the pot just below boiling? No definitive answer, but plenty of furtive glances and overly long silences. You peek into a room where two half-brothers play chess. The pieces are made of lapis lazuli and jade. The game? Unusually slow. One move every 15 minutes. The tension? Thick enough to spread on bread. No words are exchanged. Just the echo of sandal soles and the occasional loud sip of tea. You sense they've been locked in this friendly match for months. One mainstream fact. The Safavid dynasty frequently relied on strategic marriages and ceremonial appointments to keep royal relations occupied and politically neutralized. A potential rival is suddenly the governor of fig logistics. Another is dispatched to oversee prayer schedules in a tiny desert shrine. It's not exile, it's redirection. One quirky tidbit: a family feud once centered around the ownership of a prized hunting falcon named Quiet Thunder. 3 cousins claimed it. No official ruling was made. Instead, the Shah declared the falcon a non-corporeal symbol of shared blood, released it into the palace garden, and it promptly flew off to live with a gardener. Conflict solved. You visit the royal women's quarters, the Anderuni, where intrigue takes a more refined form. Whispered alliances, gift politics, and who sits where during poetry night all matter greatly. One mother of a potential heir is rumored to send saffron sweets to favored clerics and vinegar-dipped plums to her rivals. No one confronts her. Everyone praises her hospitality. And yet, the atmosphere never explodes. That's the genius, or perhaps the absurdity, of the Safavid court under Safi II. Drama is defanged by its own pacing. It's like watching a family argument in slow motion. Through scented fog, one quiet scandal surfaces when a distant cousin is caught forging the Shah's signature on a birthday invitation. He claimed it was a prank. The punishment? He's reassigned to manage the empire's inventory of ceremonial boots. He wears one pair of them to the reassignment meeting. They squeak. You're invited to a wedding, not a grand one, but still technically royal. The bride is a niece of the Shah. The groom? A low-ranking noble with a promising mustache. The ceremony features 100 candles, a recitation of a verse about figs, and a 6-hour game of guess who's going to inherit the rug concession. The actual couple seems mildly confused, but delighted. One fringe theory from a European visitor suggests that the royal family used sleep as a form of negotiation. He who rose first lost moral ground. He wrote, whether true or not, You do notice the Shah's brother sleeps until noon every day and is mysteriously never held accountable for anything. You watch an imperial picnic unfold, a family gathering with polite laughter, careful dish passing, and no one eating too fast. A cousin gifts the Shah a painting of a tree shedding its leaves, just in time. But never in a hurry. Everyone claps, no one blinks. And it's not just internal family dynamics. You hear of outer branch relatives making minor moves in distant provinces, trying to rally tax support. Name drop their bloodline, hint at succession whispers, but it never catches flame. Why? Because the Shah is just involved enough to discourage outright ambition and just uninvolved enough to make any attempt feel pointless. One nobleman puts it best as you walk past him on the balcony. It is hard to plot against still water. You stir it, and it only reflects you. As the sun sinks behind the tiled dome of the palace, you realize that the royal family functions like everything else in this reign, held together by inertia, restraint, and a shared understanding that actual conflict is far too exhausting to pursue. You sit beside a fig tree, listening to the distant laughter of cousins comparing turban fabrics. A servant refills your tea without speaking. Somewhere inside, the Shah pens another line of poetry about the dignity of shadows. Today's adventure takes you somewhere truly electrifying, the imperial treasury. That's right, an entire building dedicated to coins, ledgers, gems, and financial records so detailed they make your dreams of economic reform feel positively reckless. If you've ever wanted to see how an empire hoards, invests, and quietly forgets about wealth, this is your moment. You enter through a tall archway inlaid with dull turquoise tiles. Unlike the palace's other wings, this one doesn't glitter, it murmurs. The walls are lined with carved stone niches filled with coin jars, silk-bound account books, and inventory lists so complete they include the exact number of ornamental tassels on ceremonial tax sacks. At the heart of it all is the Grand Keeper of Coins, an elderly man whose robes are the color of aging parchment and whose beard is held in place by what might be a paperclip carved from ivory. He doesn't speak, he gestures with his ledger. He opens to a page titled simply, Current Holdings. Not urgently spent. You see line after line of revenue, silk taxes, caravan tolls, tribute from border towns, rental income from date orchards. It's a steady, stable flow, not booming, not collapsing, like a gentle river that no one dares sail too quickly. This is perhaps the most miraculous thing about Shah Safi II's reign. The empire remains solvent. Year after year, without drama. Historians still argue whether this was due to the enduring strength of Safavid trade routes, the Shah's hands-off leadership, or the sheer inertia of a well-oiled system built by his predecessors. Probably all three. The coinage you examine hasn't changed in decades. You pick up a silver Abbasi, still bearing the same inscription used during Shah Abbas I's reign. Still minted using the same molds. There's comfort in that continuity, but also a hint of stagnation. It's as if even the money has accepted that innovation is simply too much effort right now. One official proudly displays the emergency funds cabinet. It's beautifully carved, locked with 7 keys, and labeled for use only in catastrophes or particularly difficult weddings. It hasn't been opened in over 20 years. You learn that while some empires brag about gold reserves, this one brags about ledgers. The bookkeeping is exquisite. Gold ink headings, colored silk bookmarks, flourishes around decimal points. There's even a rumor that one particular ledger is so beautiful that a visiting ambassador once asked to marry it. He was politely escorted out. And yet, despite this calm, you find little signs of decay. Some revenue streams have quietly dried up, merchants rerouting through Ottoman ports, certain villages failing to report taxes for years, and a few inspectors who seem to have retired without notice. Nothing catastrophic, just a soft erosion, like a rug slowly fraying under too much polite foot traffic. One quirky anecdote from a court page. A jewel-studded goblet went missing 3 years ago. An investigation was launched. It turned out the goblet had been repurposed to store saffron in the palace kitchen. No one was punished. Instead, a second goblet was assigned to spice containment. Problem solved. You're shown the gem vault next. It's lit by flickering oil lamps and smells faintly of mothballs and rosewood. Inside, rubies, emeralds, lapis lazuli beads, pearls the size of olives. You ask how often they're used. The answer? Rarely. They're mostly for ceremonial dressings, royal dowries, and impressing bored foreign envoys who pretend they haven't seen nicer. One corner of the vault contains what's known as the legacy cabinet. It holds older coins, obsolete currencies, and a fascinating item labeled tax token of an unremembered province. No one remembers what it was for, but no one's brave enough to throw it away. Bureaucratic nostalgia is real. You stumble upon a row of unopened scroll tubes labeled reforms considered, but postponed. You peek inside one. It proposes a more efficient caravan toll system. Dated 1671. Approved, signed, sealed, and never implemented. There's a tea stain on the signature. A mainstream European trader once wrote in his journal, "The Persians are rich not because they pursue riches, but because they forget to waste them." That feels accurate. The Safavid treasury isn't a dragon's hoard or a corrupt drain, it's a large, comfortable nest, maintained, clean, slightly dusty, quietly full. One of the strangest things you notice is the department of non-urgent luxuries. This entire division is dedicated to the upkeep of items that are valuable but unnecessary. Ceremonial carpets, gem-encrusted inkpots, and a set of gold chopsticks given by a Chinese diplomat. They're catalogued, they're polished, they're never used. You watch a clerk do a coin count, tapping each coin gently with a silver pick to confirm tone. He has perfect pitch. He also hums as he works, a lullaby. You think, the treasury hums with him. You wonder, could economics be meditative? Outside, you glimpse the merchants of Isfahan, wheeling in spices, dyes, and textiles from distant lands. Despite the royal inertia, trade still thrives. The infrastructure built by more vigorous rulers continues to function. Bridges hold, caravans roll, ledgers grow heavier. And then there's taxation. You might expect rebellion or resentment. But no, the tax system is surprisingly fair. Well, by 17th century standards. Villages are assessed based on yield, not rumor. Clerks adjust rates in drought years. Bribes exist, but they're usually very tasteful and come with handwritten thank you notes. One fringe theory? Some scholars suggest the empire's steady economy was deliberately boring, designed to discourage theft. After all, why loot a treasury where the most exciting object is a perfectly balanced account of wheat levies from 1664? As you leave the vault, the sun slants through the high windows, catching on a small plaque above the exit. It reads, "Stability is not silence, it is the quiet rhythm of coins counted with care." And with that, you step back into the palace courtyard. No wealth explosion, no scandal, no crash, just a treasury that hums, ticks, and files. Not glorious, not groundbreaking, but profoundly intact. You're back outside again, standing on the outer walls of Isfahan. The breeze carries with it the faint scent of figs and saddle leather. Today, you're looking outward, beyond the empire's borders, scanning the horizon for signs of threat, invasion, or even mild interest. Spoiler: there's not much. The Safavid Empire during Shah Safi II's reign is like that quiet kid in the back of class who no one bullies because they're too peaceful to bother. And also maybe asleep. Foreign powers don't attack the Safavids. They mostly just forget to. You start your exploration with the Ottomans, the perennial rivals to the west. Historically, they've been thorns in many Safavid sides, warring over territory, trade routes, and theological legitimacy. But now, not so much. The Ottomans, at this point, are caught up in their own drama. Revolts in the Balkans, intrigue in Constantinople, too many pashas, not enough patience. You read a letter from an Ottoman vizier that simply says, "Let the Persians sleep. They'll still be there when we wake up." Historians still argue whether this mutual disinterest was strategic non-aggression or just the imperial version of mutual ghosting. Either way, it works. Border tensions are low, the occasional smugglers are politely chased off. And the maps? They haven't changed in decades. You check one that still lists a town near Tabriz as probably still there. You journey north next, to the Caspian frontier, where Russian interest has been quietly growing. A few envoys have tried to establish trade. A few whispers of military scouting have occurred. But nothing ever escalates. A Russian ambassador in a fur hat once spent 6 months in Isfahan without receiving an official audience. He left with 3 carpets, a calligraphy scroll, and what he claimed was a deeper appreciation for naps. And what of the Mughal Empire to the east? You visit a dusty chamber filled with scrolls documenting correspondence with the Mughals. The tone? Flowery, respectful, utterly uneventful. The two empires share a religion, in parts, a love of poetry, and a strong disinclination toward confrontation. You find one unopened letter dated 6 years ago with a note, to be answered once the moon favors clarity. It was never answered. The Mughals never followed up. One mainstream fact: despite minimal military action, Safavid diplomacy continues in form, if not in urgency. Gifts are exchanged, envoys are received, eventually. Treaties are renewed automatically unless someone bothers to say otherwise. It's the international relations equivalent of auto-renewing your software license and forgetting it's even running. A quirky record catches your eye. A letter from the Kingdom of Georgia requesting a military alliance. The reply? A beautiful hand-painted map of flowers native to both Persia and Georgia, with a poem comparing them to the mutual fragility of human ambition. No mention of troops, no alliance signed, but it was framed and hung in a hallway. You ask the palace guard if they've had any actual battles lately. One shrugs. A fox got into the granary last winter. He says, "We chased it. It got away." You nod. Not quite a campaign, but technically a skirmish. And yet, just beneath this peaceful surface, you sense a quiet tension. Not from imminent attack, but from imperial entropy. The army is still there, paid, dressed, occasionally drilled. But they spend more time polishing swords than swinging them. Horses are well groomed but underworked. The last time a general saw combat, he was still finishing puberty. One fringe theory among modern scholars? That this military softness was a kind of geopolitical camouflage. By presenting no threat, the Safavid Empire made itself a low-priority target. Why bother conquering a place that doesn't even raise its voice? You ride out with a small patrol to the empire's western edge. The soldiers are cheerful. They carry poetry books in their saddlebags. One recites verses about figs while another juggles dried apricots. When you ask what they'll do if they encounter hostile forces, they pause. One says, "We'll offer tea first." You believe him. You pass a border watchtower where the guards have decorated the walls with floral motifs. The viewing telescope has been fitted with a small painted frame labeled, "For contemplating distant hills." You take a turn. The hills look peaceful. And what about Europe? You visit the foreign envoy's receiving hall, a room filled with unused chairs, dusted weekly, and scrolls of polite interest from Venice, France, and even the Habsburgs. A court official explains that many ambassadors arrive here with urgent proposals. They leave with improved sandalwood wardrobes and vague promises to stay in touch. There's one memorable anecdote about a Dutch merchant who arrived with news of a conflict between England and Spain, only for the Shah to blink twice and ask if they sold more of that blue and white ceramic. The merchant said yes. A trade agreement was signed, for plates. You begin to understand. The Safavid court doesn't ignore foreign affairs. It just reframes them as aesthetic opportunities. Invaders are potential guests, treaties are poetry. And war is, ideally, something you delegate to the next dynasty. One imperial astrologer shows you a chart that predicts No major disruptions from foreign powers for approximately 3 cycles of Jupiter. You ask if that's scientific. He smiles and adds, well, it's worked so far. You end your day atop the city walls, staring out toward the west. No smoke on the horizon. No distant hooves. Just fields of wheat, quiet rivers, and the occasional trader plodding toward Isfahan with a mule full of cardamom. And behind you, the Shah sleeps peacefully in his chamber, unaware, or perhaps completely aware, that no one's coming. Not because they fear him, but because, in a world aflame with ambition, he's somehow made serenity untouchable. Tonight, you return to the palace grounds for one last long, quiet walk. The sun slips away behind the domes of Isfahan, and you can feel the empire settling into its nighttime rhythm, a rhythm so predictable and soft. It's as if the bricks themselves are tucking themselves in. This evening, you're thinking about legacy. What Shah Safi II leaves behind after decades of reigning without storm, scandal, or splendor. You sit in the Hall of Ancestors, a chamber lined with oil portraits of former Safavid rulers. Shah Abbas the Great stands out, his eyes fierce, sword gleaming, posture full of purpose. But then, nestled among them, is Safi II, painted in softer hues. No war horse, no battlefield, just him seated beside a tulip, holding a closed book, gaze turned slightly downward. Even in paint, he looks like he's listening to something quieter than history. Historians still argue what to make of this man. Some call him a placeholder, an emperor-shaped spaceholder between more dynamic chapters. Others, more generous, describe him as a stabilizing fog that kept the empire afloat by simply not rocking the boat. A few whisper that his rule was a missed opportunity, but none deny that he ruled longer than most expected, and with more consistency than nearly anyone else. You visit his tomb, a modest structure compared to the grandeur of his predecessors. There's no colossal statue, no triumphal inscriptions, just a low dome, tiles the color of river stones, and an inscription that reads, "He left behind peace, not thunder, but peace." No pilgrims, no guards, just a gardener nearby trimming hedges and humming something that sounds like a lullaby. One quirky detail? The Shah once commissioned a tapestry to summarize his reign. It was mostly shades of beige, interspersed with tiny embroidered birds, each in a slightly different posture of stillness. It now hangs in a library alcove, beside forgotten edicts and an unopened time capsule labeled to be read only if absolutely necessary. In the final years of his reign, the Shah became even quieter. Letters were signed with shorter phrases, public appearances fewer. Some say he took to long walks at dawn, wearing simple clothes and observing the city from rooftops. One baker claims he once handed her a poem about steam rising from hot bread. She never sold that loaf. You walk past the council chamber, now mostly ceremonial. The chairs are worn, the inkwells still full. A single scroll lies open on the table, an inventory list for ornamental lanterns. No new policies, no fresh reforms, just a well-lit room that waits patiently to be used again. And yet, not all is frozen. Beneath the surface of this calm reign, seeds were planted, seeds of architecture, trade routes, poetry, etiquette, tolerance. The empire endured, not just through fire, but through gentle habit. And while Safi II's name might not be etched into the annals of conquest, it lingers in something quieter, like the slightly uneven mosaic tile in the palace bathhouse, laid by the Shah himself. No one has fixed it, because, somehow, it feels more permanent than perfection. Or the ceremonial rug he had woven with only one color, cream. It baffled foreign guests. Is this unfinished? They'd ask. The court answer was always the same. No. It's complete in its silence. You visit the royal library one last time. The calligraphy room is dim. A single page lies on the desk, half filled with elegant script. It reads, "When no one remembers your voice, may they still remember the quiet after it." That's what he leaves behind. Not power, Not monuments, but a mood, a tempo, a kingdom kept whole by inertia, caretaking, and perhaps a little sacred laziness. You walk to the garden where the tulips bloom in deliberate rows. No soldiers, no songs, just the wind through plane trees and the crunch of gravel under your sandals. You look up at the palace and see one small window lit. Maybe the Shah is inside. Maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's writing another line of poetry that will never be published. And somehow, that's enough. And now, all is still. You let your breath slow. The stories you've wandered through this evening, quiet gardens, half-built pavilions, dreams recorded in golden ink. They begin to blur at the edges like stars through fog. There's no gallop of hooves, no banners flapping in conquest. Just the gentle, rhythmic pulse of a kingdom that once chose stillness over ambition. You're back beneath the dome of the night sky, the kind of night that holds its breath. You hear it, the faint breeze through cypress trees, the memory of ink drying on parchment, the echo of silk slippers on mosaic floors that never heard war cries. It's all very far away now. You can feel it softening into dream. Even the empire sleeps. No couriers galloping through gates. No drums calling soldiers. Just an old man in a quiet palace who once ruled with nothing but calm. And here you are, still, at peace, drifting gently into that soft place between thought and sleep, where even the most uneventful rain becomes a lullaby. So go ahead, close your eyes, let the quiet take over. Let the echoes fade, and let the night carry you, slowly, softly, completely, to sleep.